You've probably never heard of this game, or at least you forgot you saw this game. You probably saw this from Jacksepticeye 3 years ago in 2017, so I wouldn't really blame you. So if you will, let me tell you how this forgotten game taught me to embrace little things. This was Worlds Adrift. I don't know where to start really. I loved this game and spent hours on it. After watching Jacksepticeye play it, I was amazed at the idea of a grappling based game, with the best part being the shipbuilding. The most customizable thing in the game, and any game I've ever played, was the ships. But when I downloaded Worlds Adrift for that first time, I was met with the opening. Its calming music. I didn't realize at the time, but I'd fallen in love with that music. The player customization was alright, nothing too bad, but not amazing. The gameplay, for me, I didn't get the tutorial that came in later, but I didn't need it. I was thrown onto a small island. Not a small island, a massive island, with remnants of people's shipyards and failed ships. I saw that atmosphere, and I loved it. Now, let me quickly tell you about how the game worked. So, the world was split into tiers. The tiers being separated with either wind, storm, or sand walls, depending on their tier. The harder the wall, the more power you needed on your ship. There were two base animals, mantas and bugs. Mantas were aggressive and bugs were peaceful and only harmed you when you attacked trees. Now, the way to actually progress in the game is with something called knowledge. You get this by scanning databanks and learning schematics or pieces of the story. Now the stories. That's something I loved. So much detail went into them. I remember on that last day, as I flew towards that last island, I sat there on my ship and I read the stories again. I recently found an archive of the stories, and as I sat there reading them, I remembered that world that I flew by. And on that day, I remember learning a piece of the lore. Worlds Adrift is called this, since on a timeline, that moment was called the War of the Worlds Adrift. When I learned that on my way to that final island, I started crying. They weren't sad tears or angry tears. I was crying because the game, for me, it had just been completed with that one little bit of story. Building my first ship was a well-taught learning experience. I customized the ship as much as I could to give it my own flair, and I saved that ship to add to it for the coming years. When I tried setting sail, I saw you needed more to your ship than an empty shell. Makes sense. You can't just make a box and call it a ship and expect it to fly. So I built a helm, sail, and a skycore. I first got onto something called Atlas. They were the in-lore reason for things floating, and I realized that there was a tiny Atlas shard in that skycore. That was what lifted up your ship. Tiny details like these made me fall in love with the game, and at that moment I knew if I looked into something, I'd find more. I was playing on the PvP server since I didn't want it to be too easy, you know. So off I went, flying and discovering islands and people. I played for maybe 3 weeks or 2 weeks before I came to the impasse of so many people being out here to blow me up that another game was a bit more instantly rewarding. So I uninstalled Worlds Adrift. One day I was bored and installed it again to see it had been wiped. Bummer, but there's new stuff, I thought to myself. This was one of the wipes of Worlds Adrift that later, with the following wipes, made some of the player base stop playing the game. But the wipe didn't discourage me, so off went 14-year-old me, back on that massive island that had even more dead ships on it. Now, there was one thing that always kept me going and wanting more from this game. That was the stories. I read the ones I found and I imagined the world that was written before me. It was beautiful. Just like the game's end, in the story, the people's end came as suddenly and as ferociously as it did for Worlds Adrift. The stories, to me, they gave me this sort of lonely feeling. Not a sad feeling, not at all. But it made me feel like I wasn't just doing this for me. I was playing for the people in the stories before me. I really got into this game, if you couldn't tell. If you look up Worlds Adrift, it's not as big as Minecraft or League of Legends. No, but I wish it was. It deserved better. I wish it got better. We gave it all we could, and I guess at the end that's all that matters. This game, it made us feel so happy when we played it. simply felt like enough, no matter where you left. If your ship had just been blown up, or if you just discovered a new engine, you could leave it at that. And that's what let me uninstall and reinstall it and keep being hyperfixated on it for so long. Because it truly was such an amazing game. I reinstalled Worlds Adrift after a friend of mine told me he had it. And I wanted the crew of him, so I installed it again. To find there was a second wipe. I was bummed, trust me I was. This wasn't really the second wipe, this was more the third or fourth wipe. But I thought, hey, you've got a good friend with you. And we were going to conquer the skies together. So I thought. So I experienced the game once again with my friend, and that was Worlds Adrift for me. One more friend came by and played with me, and then one day I got an email saying, here's one free Worlds Adrift key to give to a friend. And I was like, cool, awesome, I can get another friend here. But I didn't realise this was Boss's last ditch effort at livening up the player base again. 1 month went by, and as I was ready to get on to fly my ship again, I got an email saying Worlds Adrift would shut down. I was torn, and I honestly didn't believe it, so I joined the Discord and found out it was true. I didn't feel sad. I knew those last 3 or 4 weeks I had left in the air were going to mean something, and so they did. I flew more than ever before, I interacted more than ever before, took more risks, fought more, traded more, gave lifts to strangers. And at the end, when an event was called by one of the developers, I was okay with what I'd done. I was proud of my ship and my discoveries. The event was secret to everyone. The developer who made it, Dave, didn't tell the other devs what was in it or anything. There was one thing everyone wanted every update, the Sky Whale. This beast was only in the artwork and never final, and so everyone wanted it because of how beautiful it looked. So when the event started, the islands shook and they started falling down into the void. We'd been given one island, safe haven, if you will, where people instinctively didn't fire at each other, even if PvP was on. And the best thing is, after those 2 hours of waiting on that plateau, when the time finally hit, we all mounted our helms for one last time. We all knew it was the last time. We didn't want to say it, but we knew. We rose, and we saw it. Dave had implemented the Sky Whale. It was bright, and had fireworks around it. Everyone's ship stopped. We all stared in awe. That was the end of Worlds Adrift. Overall, it was an amazing game, but developers didn't realize how wipes affected the game so badly. And when they did, it was just too late. As I sit here reading this script, I'm listening to the soundtrack, and so have you for this whole video. The music brings me back. Going onto YouTube to look it up and finding all the comments of people's memories is warming. I always cry when these songs play. They're one of the best parts of the game. They just faded in with the gameplay, and they never changed. When the game ended and the servers gave me an error, all that was left was the music. I hope Bossa or someone else comes back to this game one day, that they reopen it with the same islands that were built by the community. I personally treasure Worlds Adrift, and I have hundreds of stories from it. One thing Worlds Adrift gave me was a sense of wonder, and through their small details rewarding me with knowledge. I've kept that wonder as I've grown up, and I won't ever forget this game, for I was a pirate in the war of Worlds Adrift.